Werewolves, witches, and vampires. Oh my. We've all heard of the witch trials. If you're an American, you almost surely have heard something about the Salem witch trials. But fewer know anything about the vampires of New England. A side note, much cooler mascot than the New England Patriots. But long before Salem, there were werewolf trials across Europe. Perhaps the most notorious of all werewolf trials was that of Peter Stubbe. I'm Mick Biddick, and this is History is Criminal. In this episode, we'll take a look at the nefarious life and crimes of Peter Stubbe, aka Abel Griswold, and Peter Stump. Stubbe would face trial and a brutal execution for werewolfery, witchcraft, murder, incest, rape, and numerous other crimes. While Stubbe most likely was not a real werewolf, he might very well have been a mentally ill mass murderer, rapist, and cannibal. Or, some have suggested, he might have been a victim of political and religious upheaval of the Reformation. Now, werewolves, it seems, have been around as long as human civilization. The Epic of Gilgamesh, first recorded in 2100 BCE, our hero, Gilgamesh, rejects the goddess Ishtar after discovering she had once turned one of her former lovers into a werewolf. In Greek mythology, Zeus turns King Lycaon into a wolf. Zeus did this because Lycaon had tried to test Zeus's omnipotence by feeding him human flesh in disguise. Now, side note, wow, that is very gross. But Zeus, of course, being omnipotent, figured that out, and as punishment would turn Lycaon into a wolf. Now, this is, of course, where we're going to get the term lichen and lycanthropy. We also see people shape-shifting in animals across cultures in China. The Huli Jin, of course, the Wendigo in Native American societies. And in African folklore, there is a were hyena, aka Buddha. That's not right. Budua, or Bulton Ting. Bulton Ning. But what happens when werewolves start to work their way into real world crime? So in the 15th and 16th century, Europe was exploding with werewolves. A lot of it seems to have started in Switzerland in the early 1400s. Now, werewolves, it turns out, according to Europeans of this era, were a subset of witchcraft. By the end of the 1500s, werewolf trials would actually be the most common type of witch trial. Like other witchcraft trials, most common targets were people on the fringe of society, the odd and most likely mentally ill. It seems that at times, however, economic and political motivations may have played a role. It seems at times, however, economic and political motives may have become involved. In 1428, in Alicia, Switzerland, hundreds of men and women were burned at the stake, often with sacks of gunpowder tied around their necks. Talk about overkill. They were burned at the stakes as werewolves. It also turned out their lands and properties were seized and turned over to the local vassal, meaning the person in charge of keeping the peace locally benefited greatly from these people being found guilty of werewolfery or witchcraft. Many of the records are sketchy from this time. Between the records lost and the records that became intertwined with fantasy and local legend, it's hard to find much that can be relied on here. Still, other cases seem to be straightforward cases of serial killers. For superstitious people in a society just leaving the Dark Ages, it might have been easier to accept people in league with the devil and turning into wolves than it was to accept people suffering from a mental disorder or possibly just being straight up evil people. In 1521, inquisitors from the Catholic Church conducted numerous werewolf trials across France. From their investigations came the common theme: the would-be werewolves would be approached by a man in black, supposedly the devil. And the devil would give them a magical salve or cloak or belt that allowed them to turn into a wolf. Now, a werewolf, they did everything from animal mutilations to eating babies. One such case comes to us out of France is that of Nicolas Damant, the demon tailor of Chalon. While much of the details of this case are missing, there are some facts that we can piece together. Damant was a moderately successful tailor. According to legend, his ability as a tailor allowed him to become a master of disguise, allowing him easy access to his victims. But the more common theory is that he lured children into his tailor shop where he murdered and possibly ate them. Yes, we are going to talk about a little bit of cannibalism today. When local authorities became suspicious, they searched his shop and found barrels filled with bleached bones of children. That not being enough, the story spread that he also took the form of the wolf or covered himself in wolf skins and attacked other victims in the nearby woods. The monk confessed, most likely under torture, between anywhere from 10 to 48 murders. In 1598, he was burned alive at the stake, convicted of witchcraft and werewolfery. It would be Peter Stubbe, however. By the way, that is spelled Stubbe, that would become the most infamous werewolf and werewolf trial in European history. Born near Bedberg in what is now Germany between 1525 and 1530, the date seems to be a little fuzzy and contradicts depending on which source you look at. He became a wealthy and well-liked and respected farmer. And according to Steve Wagner, author of Werewolf of Bedberg, the true story of a monster that terrorized a German village, Stubbe may have been Protestant and caught in the middle of the religious and political upheaval of the Reformation in Germany. Some historians theorize this might have played a role in the accusations against Stubbe, but that again tends to be a little fuzzy when you look into it. But they speculate that his trial and torturous death might have been a tool to scare some back into the warm embrace of the one true church. His name even seems to be wrapped up in mystery. Stubbe, as I said, spelled Stubbe, with several other variations of spelling of that, but also Stump, Stumpp, and Stumpf with an F at the end in place of a second P. Now, this is a little confusing, but at some point it seems that Peter had lost his left hand, which some surmise may have led to the name Stub or Stump, and this may not have been his actual last name. At times, he is also known as Ariel, with, again, various spellings, with the last name Grizzle. It's unclear if this was an alias or possibly a variation on his actual name, but he will go down in history, for the most part, as Peter Stubbe. And that is a name that will go down in infamy, and so the one that we will prefer to use here in this podcast. Unlike many other werewolf cases from this time period, we have at least a partial contemporary account. While it seems the original German document has been lost to time, an English translation, credited to George Fors from 1591, does exist. And it is this document, titled The Damnable Life of Peter Stubbe, and it is this document, titled The Damnable Life of Stubbe Peter, Peter is spelled Peeteer, that we'll get the bulk of our information. Now, according to Stubbe's confession, he started to practice black magic at the age of 12. So here we have this tween who is somehow now in league with the devil practicing black magic. This would eventually lead to a proverbial deal with the devil. But Peter did not ask for wealth or power, or even to become a great guitar player. Looking at you, Robert Johnson. No, what Peter wanted was to wreak vengeance on anyone he felt had wronged him, or it seems may have just crossed his path. In The Damnable Life of Stubbe Peter, it says, quote, "The devil, who hath ready ear to listen to lewd motions of cursed men, promised to give him whatsoever his heart desire during his mortal life, whereupon this vile wretch neither desired riches nor promotion, nor with his fancy satisfied with any external or outward pleasure, but having a tyrannous heart and a most cruel body mind, requested that his pleasure might be work his malice on men, women, and children in the shape of some beast, whereby he might live without dread or danger of life, and unknown to the executor of any body enterprise which he meant to commit," unquote. So, in short, Peter asked the devil to give him the power to turn himself into a beast with the goal of killing whomever he wanted without anyone knowing it was him. To do this, the devil supposedly gave Peter a magic belt, and when Peter put the belt on, he took the form of a massive wolf. As he said in his confession, quote, "The likeness of a greedy, devouring wolf, strong and mighty, with eyes great and large, which might in night sparkle like fire, a mouth great and wide, with most sharp and cruel teeth, a huge body, and mighty paws," unquote. It could be that Stubbe was suffering from some mental disorder, like clinical lycanthropy, which is where a person actually believes themselves to be a wolf, and would cover himself with a wolf hide. This could be where the idea of the magic belt came from. And while some say werewolves and others suffered from ergot poisoning, at least in Stubbe's case, that seems unlikely, as this werewolf fetish of his seems to have lasted for 25 years. So, was he really a werewolf? I don't know, but I lean more towards he was just probably a nutcase. Okay, It's more than fair at this point to point out that as a rule of modern law, we do not recognize werewolfery. And maybe Stubb was not a werewolf, but if he was even guilty of a small fraction of what he was accused of, he was a very dangerous and sick individual. The accusations will include mass murder, serial rapist, child abduction and murder, incest, child molestation, and cannibalism. His being a werewolf and a practitioner of black magic may have been a way for the people of Bedberg in the 1480s to just simply explain what is really almost unimaginable and unthinkable. So, how does this all go about? Farmers began to report cattle and sheep mutilations on what seems like a near daily basis. Then children and young women start to go missing. Now, trigger alert here. They begin to start to find the bodies of small children strangled, bludgeoned, and partially eaten. While officially Stubb will be convicted of 16 murders, it's possible his victims could number much higher. Some sources claim that it could even be over 100. And it seems that his own children were among his first victims. After the death of his wife, he would begin an incestuous relationship with his daughter, Sybil, also known as Beell, Beell. This relationship would produce a child. If that were not enough to show you that this man is a pretty sick and twisted individual, he would also murder his firstborn son, the son he had with his wife. One day, he asked his son to come out into the woods with him and help him with some task. After entering the woods, he bludgeoned the boy to death, splitting his head open and eating his brains. You heard that right. Now, remember, this isn't a zombie story. This is a werewolf story. But he ate his son's brains. While this is more than enough to want to see Stubb punished, it really is just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg for what this sick person will be into. Now, Bors in his translation goes on to tell us how Stubb would actually hunt his victims. He describes Stubb as looking for groups and then scattering them to pick off the weakest, much in the way a wolf pack might hunt its prey. Quote, "Yea, often it came to pass as he walked abroad in fields, if he by chance to spy a company of maidens playing together, or else milking their kin," meaning, or kine, meaning cows. In his wolfish shape, he would incontinent run among them, and while the rest escaped by flight, he would be sure to lay hold of one, and after his filthy lust fulfilled, he would murder her presently. Now, we do have at least one report of a young girl who managed to escape this type of attack. The girl was cut from the herd, much the way described there. This wolf creature runs out at a group of children playing. They scatter. It takes after one. And Stubb, in his wolf form, grabs the girl by the collar. But the girl was wearing a 1400 style high stiff collar, which actually prevented Stubb from being able to get to her throat and rip her throat out. Now, in one of the weirdest acts of, I guess you could call it, heroism ever, our heroes in this case are going to be cows. That's right. She began to scream, which panicked a nearby herd of cows, which then charged at Stubbe. Fearing the horns of the cow, Stubbe released the girl and made her run for it. Now, the girl nor any of the other children were able to actually identify their attacker, but it seemed to fit the MO that Stubbe would later admit to. Other victims were taken by chance when Stubbe, as a wolf, came across them alone in the woods. Now, I don't want to victim blame here, but with animal mutilations, missing women and kids, and a few bodies turning up, I'm not sure why you'd want to go for a walk alone in the woods. But again, don't want to victim blame here. But apparently, he would lie in hiding in the woods and pick off lone hikers or walkers as they would come through the woods. And again, body parts we found, or bodies with their throats ripped out, would be found later by passerbys. Now, again, a bit of a warning of what's coming up here, because this one is, again, a really, really nasty one. In one of his more grisly attacks, his victims were two young pregnant women. Quote, two godly young women being with child, tearing the child out of their wombs in most bloody and savage sort, and after ate their hearts, painting hot and raw, which he accounted dainty morsels and the best agreeing to his appetite, unquote. Now, this is an account from the damnable life of Stubbe Peter, is based on his own confessions, where he told the person he was confessing to that these hearts were dainty morsels that best agreed to his appetite. So, wow, right? But his most bold attack would actually take the form of a triple homicide. This is one where he probably had the most chance of being caught in the act, but will manage to get away. Now, again, according to his confession, he was hiding in his wolf form in some brushes when he spied three young adults walking nearby, two men and a young woman. As it would happen, Stubbe knew one of the young men, and he called to the young man by name, asking him to help carry some heavy boards. When the young man kindly came to his aid, Stubbe bludgeoned the boy. When the boy didn't return to his friends, the other young man came looking for him, at which point Stubbe was able to kill the second young man and then took after the girl. Because Stubbe was a wolf at this point, he was able to quickly catch the girl, at which point he then raped her and killed her. Her body was never found, leading the authorities to believe he consumed her whole. Now, that seems highly unlikely that he could eat this entire person, but who knows? Stubbe is also said to have had multiple women in his life. Not just the ones he ate, but the ones he had relationships with. In addition to the reported molestation of his daughter, he had a supposed incestuous relationship with his sister. He also took on a mistress named Catherine Trompin, who will come up again later. And Stubbe also was known to frequent prostitutes. Reportedly, that wasn't enough for Stubbe. Catherine Trompin, a woman of tall, comely stature, this is a quote, of exceeding good favor, and one that was well esteemed among her neighbors. But his lewd and inordinate lust being not satisfied with the company of many concubines, nor his wicked fancy content with the beauty of any woman, at length the devil sent to him a wicked spirit in the similitude of the likeness of a woman, so fair of face and comely of personage that she resembled some rather heavenly heaven than any mortal creature. So far her beauty exceeded the choicest sort of woman, and with her, as with his heart's delight, he kept company of the space of 7 years, though in the end she proved, as it was found indeed, no other than a she-devil. So, a lot of verbiage there, but basically what we're saying is he becomes sexually involved over a period of 7 years with a she-devil or demon given to him by the devil because she was, she was so beautiful. Now, was this just a woman of questionable morals? Was it a demon? It's hard to say. Given the sexual morality of the day, there really, in their eyes, may have been no meaningful difference. She-devil or not, though, it would be Catherine Trumpkin that would pay a heavy price for her relationship with Stubbe. So these murders and disappearances will go on for years, and at no point does anybody remotely think Stubbe is a possible suspect. I know I keep switching between Stubbe and Stubbe. I think it's actually Stubbe. I don't know why I keep saying Stubbe. In fact, Bors tells us that Stubbe was well known and well liked by the people in the village. Quote, he would go through the streets of Bedberg in comely habit, very civilly, as one well known to all inhabitants thereabout, and oftentimes he was saluted by those whose friends and children he had butchered, though none suspected. Unquote. In fact, many were convinced that a wolf or wolves were to blame. Now, of course, people have always been freaked out by wolves, although in reality, wolves attacking people is a very, very rare occurrence. Don't want to put any heat on wolves here that they don't deserve. So, in 1589, limbs from multiple men, women, and children were found in a field by the men of Bedberg, and they decided that's it. We've had enough. We need to track down and kill this animal or creature that has been terrorizing us for what's now 2.5 decades. So they began tracking the animal, and the tracking went for many days until at last they spotted a massive wolf and gave chase. Armed with guns and mastiffs, you're not familiar? Big dogs. They eventually cornered the wolf. With no chance of escape, the wolf turned and transformed into a person before their very eyes. So Stubbe had removed the magic belt, although the hunters never found the belt. Seeing the wolf transform into Stubbe, the men were in shock. They knew Stubbe. Many were his friends. At first, they thought a demon had turned himself into Stubbe's form. They were so convinced that this was not really Stubbe that the hunting party actually took their captive to Stubbe's home, where they were able to finally convince themselves that the person they had captured was indeed Stubbe. So he was arrested, of course, and put on trial for witchcraft, werewolfery, murder, and numerous other crimes. Now, I know you're probably wondering, witchcraft? What are we talking about, witchcraft? Witchcraft was actually any time you were in league with the devil. It didn't necessarily mean you were a witch. But you had some kind of deal with the devil. That was considered witchcraft, and werewolves were considered a form of witchcraft. Now, this being a werewolf/witchcraft trial, there is, of course, going to be some torture involved. He was stretched on the rack, but facing greater possible torture, he would confess to his various crimes. He told the story of making the deal with the devil, practicing black magic at the age of 12, as we said before. He told him about the belt given to him by the devil that turned him into the wolf, and he admitted to the murder of 14 children and 2 pregnant women. But it wouldn't just be Stubb who would face the executioner in this case. After, quote, due examination of the matter, unquote, it was found that his daughter, Sybil, also known as Beale, and his mistress, Catherine Tromkin, were both accessories to the murders. On October 28, 1589, all 3 would be sentenced to be executed. Sybil and Catherine would be burned at the stake. Now, of course, it is the 1500s, and they were women, so that's just kind of how it goes. They also don't record a lot of information about women at this point in history. So the exact charges, the exact evidence against Sybil and Catherine, really don't know. So they would be burned at the stake. However, the authorities of Bedberg really want to make sure Stubbs' execution was every bit as bloody as his crimes. So on October 31st, 1589, just pure coincidence, it happens to be Halloween. This is in no way actually tied to Halloween or All Hallows Eve. Stubb was taken and tied to a large wheel. Then, red-hot pincers were used to peel back his skin in 10 places. Understand, he's alive during this. Following this, his arms and legs were broken with a large wooden axe or hatchet. The executioner then struck his head from his body, meaning they decapitated him. The body was then placed still on the wheel, tied to a large pole with the executioner then struck his head from his body, in other words, decapitated him. The body, still tied to the wheel, was then placed on a large stake and burned to ash. Now, on either side of him, one to the left and one to the right, were Sybil and Catherine, who would be burned alive at the same time that Stubbs' decapitated body was burned. The authorities weren't done with Stubb yet. They erected a pole. Oh, you know what? I got something wrong there. Let me go back. On October 31st, 1589, now it's just coincidence that this happens to be Halloween. This has nothing really to do with Halloween or All Hallows Eve. But Stubb was taken and tied to a large wheel. Then, using red-hot pincers, his skin was peeled back in 10 places. Now, understand, he's alive during this. Following this, his arms and legs were broken with a large wooden axe or hatchet. It was at this point the executioner then struck his head from his body, in other words, decapitated him. The body was taken and tied to a stake and burned to ash. On either side of him, one to the left and one to the right, were Sybil and Catherine, who were burned alive at the same time Stubbs' body, beheaded body, was burned at the stake. However, the authorities were not done with Stubb yet. They erected a pole and placed the wheel he'd been tortured on halfway up the pole, hung 16 approximately 1 yard long boards from the wheel, each one denoting one of his official victims. Then on top of the sharpened pole, they stuck Stubb's severed head. This was a clear warning to others not to make deals with the devil, or maybe don't murder, rape, and cannibalize children. That seems like a better thing to warn people not to do. So Stubb was possibly a psychopath, a serial killer, but most likely wasn't actually a werewolf. Some historians even question if he was a murderer. The political and religious situation of the Holy Roman Empire in the 1500s was chaotic and tumultuous. The diet of worms, the trial of Martin Luther, had taken place earlier in the century. Conflict between Catholics and Protestants had become violent, with both sides committing various atrocities. If Stubb was a Protestant and this was a Catholic controlled area, then his execution may have been a way to threaten other Protestants to return to the Catholic Church. Now, this is all just theory and speculative at best, but it could be possible. But it is just as possible that a werewolf was simply the only way to explain Stubb's crimes to the minds of villagers in the 1500s. We're not dealing with people who could really readily understand mental illness. That Stubb was clearly suffering from something. Exactly what that was, we may never know. But there you have it. Peter Stubb, the Werewolf of Bedberg. Definitely a weird, a crazy, and somewhat disgusting and gross story. So, hey, tell you what, if you like that, tell your friends who are out there. It's History is Criminal. And hey, if you didn't like it, tell your enemies. They might as well listen to it too, right? And while you're at it, if you could go to the poll on Spotify and answer any way you'd like, that kind of stuff just kind of helps get the more interaction with the podcast. The easier it'll be later for people who might want to find it to find it. But hey, until next time, this has been Mick Biddick and History is Criminal. And I believe next time, probably going to take a little bit of a look at, I'm kind of tossing up right now between the various crimes of a young Andrew Jackson. Now, not anything he may have done while he was president. If you don't know much about the life of Andrew Jackson, very, very, very interesting stuff from a young Andrew Jackson. Also thinking maybe about the murder of Arthur of Brittenton, if you are not familiar with the once again murdered nephew of an English king. All right. I'd say it's been fun, but a lot of werewolves eating people, not that fun. Till next time, this has been History is Criminal.